evil and reward for the righteous. And of course, when a group says that, they are telling you that they're the ones that are righteous. And you had something that's beginning to look like Christianity, and within that particular Qumran or Dead Sea community, you had a sub-community of the Essenes. Now this gets really interesting because in that community, you had something called the Teacher of Righteousness. Now the Teacher of Righteousness, he was the leader of a group that had been kind of wandering around spiritually, trying to figure things out, and then he kind of came along, and he was their priest. So they believed that you had no ownership. Everything was held in common, a communistic community. They did not believe in marriage. They believed in celibacy.
Now, you're talking about the Essenes, right?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know this part about the Essenes.
Every time a religion comes along and goes, we believe in celibacy, they're not going to be around too much. We had the Shaker community, and they did the same thing that the Essenes did. The historians at the time tell us that the Essenes, and I'm quoting, adopted children of a pliable age and raised them according to their own beliefs as if they were their own. They did young children who had not their will set yet, and they molded them into their community and their belief system as if they were their own children, but they did not marry. So you have a teacher of righteousness. He's leading the community. The way you come into this community is to be baptized by the teacher of righteousness. It's a ritual cleansing. They had a communal meal once a week. He blessed that communal meal. It was the high point of their weekly ritual. You have a belief of resurrection of the dead. You have a belief that's looking a lot like modern Christianity.
So who was this teacher of righteousness?
We don't know much about him. We really don't know much about him at all, except the reflections of their manual of discipline. Different books like that simply tell us that he was their spiritual leader. We know, or at least we think we do, because there was this very, very odd script that was found. Kim, there are only two things that were found in that whole cave cross-section that really weren't considered a codexes or a scroll or a papyrus or whatever. This little thing was a piece of stone with ink on it called the Vision of Gabriel. And we think it was written around 50 years before Jesus. And it is the most amazing book because it tells of one of the teachers of righteousness, one of the early leaders. Apparently the Pharisees and the Sadducees were angry with him because of his teaching. Of course, his teaching was somewhat exclusive, and they killed him. And they left him to rot on the side of a mountain. And this book says, this little piece of stone says, Gabriel came down to this man who was rotting. He was in decomp. He was turning to mush. And he said, in 3 days, live, Prince of Peace, and dung of the rocky crevice. And he called him dung because he was turning to dung. He was decomposing. But he also called him the Prince of Peace. And he told him in 3 days he would be resurrected.
This is wild.
Look at this stone that happened 50 years before Jesus, and we see a 3-day resurrection of a teacher of righteousness in a community that baptized and had ritual meals once a week, which we now call the Lord's Supper. And we see that there is a great possibility that we have a template of what we are today coming out of this community. And I might add one other thing. Jesus was in the area. He was baptized only 3 miles from where the center of that community was.
Do you think from this information that Christianity started then? Before Jesus?
It looks like the template may have been in place, and that Jesus, we had been wondering, what in the world is going on with this guy who's 30 years old and he's not married? Because every other sect of Judaism, marriage was almost required to be a rabbi. It was like if you didn't get married before you were, 30 years old, something was wrong. And yet this man is following the steps of the Essene community's inner sanctum.
So do you think Jesus was an Essene, a priori?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say yes because I have no conclusive proof, but I tell you the evidence is weighed on that fact. The evidence seems to be weighed on the fact that Jesus may have been an Essene.
That's fascinating. Is Fernando Klein saying that there may have been 2 or 3 messiahs?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That is very, very unusual, but yes. Okay, so we have to look at our religion through our pre-stained eyes, right?
Right.
So we're carrying this weight with us, this prejudice with us all the time, and Christians, they have it worked out because he comes back, right? You have Jesus, and he came as the prophet and the high priest, and he was killed, and he's coming back as a warrior king. Well, the Jewish community isn't looking for him to come back; they're looking for him to come. And if you're coming once, and you have these conflicting viewpoints of what a Messiah is supposed to be, then you have to figure out what's going on. And there are people in the Essene and Qumran communities that are expecting 2 Messiah, maybe even 3. First, let me point out that Christ is a title, and it means the anointed one. There are only 3 people, 3 stations that were anointed. The prophet was anointed, the priest was anointed, and the king was anointed. So if you're expecting the anointed one, you are expecting someone to be anointed at one of those stations. And when you have scriptures that say he will come as a prophet, he will come as a warrior king, he'll come as this, he'll come as that, then you really have this kind of divergent view of what he could be. And so there are still Jews today that believe that there may be more than one Messiah, and certainly then they believed in at least 2. They could kind of sort of put the prophet and priest together in the same role, but there was no way that they could wrap their mind around the fact that this guy was going to be coming to bless them and kill a whole bunch of people. So they had it divided in their mind that there would be a prophet and or a prophet priest, and then separately a warrior king. So they were looking for 2 messiahs.
When you state that Christ was a title, which I totally get, which means the anointed one, what was this guy's name?
Yeshua ben Yosef.
Okay, Yeshua ben Yosef. Okay.
So when you look at Joshua in the Old Testament,
yes,
well, that's the same name as Jesus without the transliteration, without the change of form. His name was Yeshua, Joshua, right. Joshua. That was his name. Bar, which means son of Joseph.
So there really was no person, Jesus Christ.
There was a Jesus who was a Christ, but there were more than one Jesuses at the time. You go back in history in that particular time, and there are several people who were named Jesus, and a couple of them were killed. So even if you were to say Jesus was killed by the masses or by the Jews or by the Romans or whatever, at this particular time between 0 and or let's say 2 BC to 2 AD, you would come across 2 or 3 Jesuses who were killed by the Romans or the Jews at that particular time who had claimed to be leaders. It was a very common name. It was like
John or something?
Yes.
Or Jim?
Yes.
When Fernando Klein came to you to publish this